Hey guys, and welcome to another Q&A Monday video. In this video I'll try to answer as many of your questions as I can in as much detail as possible, but I get so many questions every day that I can't answer them all. So if I don't get to your question in this video, don't worry, I might get to it in the next one. If not, just drop it down in the comments and I'll answer it as soon as I can. So without further ado, let's jump into the first question. Game Teller asks, do you ever get a bit frustrated and scared in the house? It can sometimes be a little bit frustrating. I mean, as I've said in previous videos, it's not like the house is actually active all the time. It's generally quite quiet. It's only every so often that like my sleep is interrupted because it's been as noisy as it has. Generally, the activity that I get is because I've actually gone out and looked for it. I've got the cameras, I've stayed up and I've done an investigation and some kind of experiment or something to try and capture something new. On a day-to-day basis, it's not too bad, but it's in them times where it is heightened, and then several nights in a row you're starting to hear noises around the house and you are waking up, and it's at that time you think, just stop. You know what I mean? Like, that can be frustrating, especially if you got to get up for work or you've had a late night doing something and you just want quiet, and it's at them times where it can be the most frustrating. But as for scary, I mean, there's always an element of fear in it because you don't know who's making the noises or what's making the noises, and so there's always that unknown is always a little bit scary. But generally I don't worry too much about it. Like, when I go into an investigation, I'm nervous, of course I'm nervous, but for the most part I've not really had that many bad experiences since moving into this house, at least. And so at the moment I'm not really too worried. It's it seems pretty light at the moment. Matteo asks, hi Michael, have you ever felt spirits in the house during a Q&A? Sometimes I heard noises in the background. Okay, these can be normal noises, but who knows? So you've kind of partially answered my question for me a little bit. Now, I shoot these Q&As during the day, so there's always a possibility that you've heard a neighbour messing around in the garden or somebody passing by. I've shot them when Sean has been in the house as well, so there's always a chance you've heard her pottering around, even though she tries to be quiet for me. There's always a chance that you're going to hear her doing something downstairs. That's not to say that there's never been a paranormal occurrence, but it's just the chances of the time when I'm shooting being the point in which there is activity. Because, I mean, if you look at it in terms of percentage, you say 2% of the time there is activity in the house. The chances of me filming during that 2% is pretty slim. So there will have been occasions in the past, but usually I'm so focused on the video that I haven't really paid much attention to it. I'm focusing on the answers and making sure that the content's right. So yeah, it's possible, but generally it's a slim possibility. Variac asks, when are the spirits most active? Day, night, evening, or morning? I would say that it's probably nighttime is when it's most active, and I don't know necessarily why that is. Perhaps it's something to do with the moon's energy, or something to do with like the veil between our realms or something during the night being thinner. I don't know. But for the most part, it's most active around midnight. Between midnight and like 4 in the morning is when I've heard the most activity. That's not to say there isn't activity during the day. There obviously is. I've caught things the day before, but it's mostly at night. Tony the Night Owl asks, Michael, you don't seem to get the low vibration spirits most investigators do. The ones that say horrible things, curse, and seem to get angry. Do you think it's due to your respectful demeanour or the spirit guide Daniel? See, this is an interesting question because obviously in the past I've had quite a negative entity around, and it wasn't until sort of Daniel came around that things sort of slowly changed, or at least until he started making his presence known. I don't know if he was there the whole time, but it was then that things started to pick up. So you could say that having Daniel around has obviously made a very positive influence over the energies that are around me, but you're also not wrong. Like, I don't provoke, I don't do any of that. So I do think that also plays a part in it. If I'm going to encourage spirits to come forward and communicate, if I'm being nice, I've got positive energies, and they say you have an aura, you know, and if my aura's it's oozing positivity in any way, shape, or form, I imagine you attract like for like, don't you? I mean, if you're positive, then you bring in positive energies. They do say that people who sort of ooze negative emotion, you know, people under depression or going through a hard time in their life, they're the ones that encourage the more negative spirits to come. Obviously, unwillingly, it's not like they're asking them, but something about their aura and their energies is what brings them negative entities in. So I do think it's a mixture of everything, to be honest. I don't think there's any one particular reason why I don't get them that often. I think it's a combination. Nico asks, "Hi Michael, how would you advise people to deal with demonic hauntings?" Now, this is kind of a tough question because I wouldn't presume to advise anybody on how to deal with demonic haunting because I'm not exactly a poster boy for it. I didn't deal with it the best way I could. I'm sure if I'd gotten help properly the way I probably should have done so early on, it might not have lasted as long as it did. But then again, it might have gotten worse. And the thing was with me, I did speak to people about it, and you get the same advice, go speak to a priest and things like that. But it's not exactly like every priest is trained in exorcism. You can't just pop down to your local church, find an exorcist who'll nip around your house and sort it out. It's not that simple. A lot of people, a lot of priests don't even believe in sort of demonic possession and stuff. Like, not everybody is of that mentality, and so it's not as easy as just going to talk to somebody. So I think if I was going to give you any advice, I would say surround yourself in positivity. People themselves, you can't just put on a positive influence, but these things feed on negative energies. So the more you're surrounded in light and friendship and, really positive emotions, then it has a lot less to feed on. And if you do follow a particular faith, any particular church that you do frequent, it's always worth asking and speaking to somebody who deals in that kind of thing. It's not just any old priest. I mean, you speak to someone who knows what they're talking about and see what they can recommend. Because I just, like I say, I wouldn't presume to tell you how to deal with that. Hannah asks, "Did you hear about any further paranormal activities in the houses since you left them?" Now, I've only really been back to one house since I left it, and that was the house before this one. I'd left some things in the loft and I went back to go pick them up. And just as kind of part of the conversation, I kind of turned it towards unusual things, and I maybe played it off, just say that it was the neighbours, that sort of thing. And they said they hadn't heard anything, that they couldn't explain any noises or anything like that. The only other house that I've heard from is the very first house that I lived in, because obviously my mum, my family lived there. And so when I went to uni, I called back and they said they hadn't experienced anything. So to my knowledge, there hasn't been any experiences since I left them, but I can't speak for them all. I think it'd probably be interesting, actually. I'd like to see if I could film that one day, like go around previous houses and talk to the current tenants and see if they've actually experienced anything. I think that would make quite an interesting video. Maybe I'd show them some of the videos I caught there and see how they react to that. Although it's probably not a good thing to do if they've just moved into a property. You don't want to be putting them off. But I don't know, just food for thought. Janet asks, "Hi Michael, I was wondering how often, if at all, do you encounter visual manifestations? It just seems like a lot of the activity that happens is things moving, knocking, or footsteps, etc. Have you caught any apparitions on camera?" Now, apparitions aren't a thing that happen very often, especially capturing on the camera, because I think the environment has to be just right for the camera to be able to pick up on that. I have seen them in the past, and I have actually caught apparitions. I've caught a full body apparition on my night vision camera before, and I've had shadow figures in the past. But as for actually seeing them with my own eyes, I think there's only been a number of occasions. Back when I was at uni and the negative entity was around, I would see shadows quite frequently. But once that sort of took a sideline and sort of faded off, the apparitions, actually visually seeing them with my own eyes, have mostly been like orbs and little balls of light and things like that. So, like I say, they're quite rare. Jedikai asks, "Hi Michael, I know you say not to communicate with your passed away family members, but I really want to talk to my stepdad who died. So do you think it will be okay if I communicate with him?" Now, I don't say not to communicate with past loved ones. I just say that I personally don't want to do it because I think it opens me up too much. And having had experience with negative entities, it's not something I want to repeat. So I'm not in a rush to open myself up that emotionally when dealing with spirits. But there are many, many people that communicate with past loved ones. I mean, there are people that play with Ouija boards very frequently and have never had a bad experience. And I think it's all to do with intent. If you go in with the right attitude and you mean well, then I don't see a problem with it. And a lot of, I say professional, like paranormal investigators, they would say the same thing. There's no actual problem with communicating with spirits. I mean, it's just you've got to be aware of the risk is all. I don't for a second say that you shouldn't do it. I personally wouldn't. The Hornet asks, "Hello, Michael. If I open up to communicate with spirits and want them to stay with me and follow me wherever I go for maybe physical protection or just as a friend, is that possible? Is it possible for a spirit to physically protect or be there for you if you get close to them?" This was such an interesting question. I kind of had to include it because I can't think of a single person that I've ever spoke to that actively wanted to be followed by ghosts. And it's just interesting. I mean, theoretically, yes, I guess it's probably possible. I mean, if you treat a spirit as a person, as they were, then yeah, sure. I mean, if you strike up a connection, I don't see a reason why they wouldn't follow you, but you wouldn't want to really actively ask spirits to connect with you and to stick around and giving them that permission, because you never know who you're speaking to. So you might strike up a rapport with a spirit through a Ouija board session, ghost box, whatever. You've got some kind of connection with the spirit, but they could be lying to your face, and then you invite them home. You could have invited anything in. I mean, there are so many stories out there of exactly that thing, and then the spirit ends up not being who they thought it was and turns out to be a negative entity. So, I mean, I wouldn't advise it, really, asking spirits to follow you home, because you really do not know. But in theory, I guess it's possible. Al Fay asks, "Has paranormal activity occurred with relatives or friends in the house?" Now, this is another question I get asked quite a lot, but I kind of touch on it in previous answers, in previous Q&As, so I decided to just kind of give you a dedicated answer for it now. Yes, it does happen. There has been instances where friends have come round and we've heard footsteps upstairs, or like something's moved that nobody touched and that sort of thing, and they react exactly as you expect somebody to react in that situation. Unless they know me, unless they're like close enough to me to know exactly what's going on, then they're just as surprised as anybody would be. If they do know, then they brush it off and just sort of pretend it's not happening. But most of the people that know that I'm haunted don't really come around that often. And it kind of goes into what I was saying before about the 2% of the time the activity is happening. The chances of a friend or a relative coming around and being there for that 2% are just really, really slim. It's not like they're coming and they're spending a week here. They're usually here for a couple of hours or maybe a day at the most, and most of the time nothing happens. But if you are interested in seeing a video in which activity happens around my brother, there is a video up here where I asked him to come around and stay for a night, and things were pretty active for him. So I'll put a link in the description for that, or on screen or something. Mary asks, "Hey Michael, I was wondering, how long have you been experiencing the paranormal activity that is present in your videos?" Now, it kind of depends what videos you're referring to the activity that you mean, because the general haunting stuff has been going on for 6 years, but the more poltergeist-esque activity that are the most popular videos I have, they took place during the first 3 years. So that things were most active then. But then as I got into the more investigation, started buying equipment, that took place over the remaining 3 years. So it has varied throughout the years, the type of activity I get. And like right now, it's mostly only when I'm actively seeking it, and I get more like spirit boxes and noises, that kind of thing. Whereas the first 3 years were much more sort of violent things getting thrown around and knocked over and stuff like that. A asks, "Question for you. Have you given much thought to how they are able to move objects? To do so, would they need mass? Do they have mass? If they make noises on the stairs when they're walking, they'd need weight or something, right?" This is something I've thought about, but I don't really have a definitive answer for it. No, I don't think they necessarily do need mass to be able to move an object or make a noise, because, I mean, you just look at like magnets and the way they work. There's no physical mass in between, but the object that they're going towards will either come towards them or it will repel and move away. But there's no physical thing there. This is just a force of nature. And I think it's perfectly possible that there are other forces like that we just don't fully understand yet. And they do say spirits themselves, they do carry an electromagnetic charge. So there's every possibility that they harness magnetic energies as well as other forces. So no, I don't think that they necessarily need mass. As for how they make noises, I mean, that's kind of anyone's guess. I do have a few experiments I want to try and, I don't know, come to some conclusion about that. So, I mean, stay tuned. I will try to get back to this at some point. But for now, yeah, I don't think they need the mass. So that's it for this week's Q&A, guys. I hope I answered your questions sufficiently and in enough detail. If I didn't get to your question in this video, like I say, don't worry, I might get to it in the next one. If not, just drop it down in the comments and I will answer it as soon as I can. So thank you all so much for watching. And as always, I'll post any and all activity as and when I get it.